Have you ever lived through a day when truth shattered everything you once believed? Not the sudden slap of fate, but that first glance into yourself when all you tried to hold on to had already fallen away. There are nights, not because you're lonely, but because you realize the crowd still can't fill a certain emptiness. There are moments when you don't want anyone to touch you, not because you're strong, but because you're too tired to explain why you haven't collapsed yet. We live in an era that rushes to bandage, yet no one teaches us how to stand still and look at the wound. But the Stoics were different. They didn't draw detours around pain, they walked straight through it. Not to conquer, but to see the truth. Some things only appear when everything else has fallen away. This video isn't meant to make you feel better. It's here to tell you, you don't need to feel okay to begin again with strength. 1. The gift in your worst day. Some crises arrive without warning, without noise, without grandeur. They come quietly, like a fine crack in a wall you once believed was solid. Then one morning, as your eyes pass over everything familiar, the person beside you, the job, the room, the mirror in the bathroom, you suddenly realize none of it truly belongs to you. Not because things have changed, but because you now see them with eyes that are no longer the same. That is the beginning of collapse. We often think of collapse as a catastrophe, but for those who've stood at the edge of themselves, they'll tell you a truth few want to admit. Collapse is necessary. Not to punish you, but to force you to examine the foundation upon which you've built your life. How much of it is real? How much of it is what others expected you to become? How much is habit, fear, compromise painted to look like stability? Modern life teaches us to build fast. Careers, reputations, social networks, successful relationships. But it doesn't teach us how to check the foundation. And the irony is this. Those who build the tallest often stop least to ask, is what I'm standing on solid enough to bear my own weight? Until one day, just one small event, a breakup, a career failure, a sudden death, and it all comes crashing down, not because it was weak, but because it was never real enough. The Stoics understood this deeply. Epictetus owned nothing. He was a slave, crippled, stripped of everything society considers basic rights. Yet he had one thing no one could take from him, a self not built on external conditions. He was living proof of a cold but unwavering truth. If your foundation lies beyond what can be lost, then nothing can take you from yourself. That's why, when the world collapses, you must stand still, not out of weakness, but because it's the only way to hear the voice of your foundation. You may not like what you see. You may realize that most of what you once called me was just a performance, but that is the first step. Only when the old breaks apart can the real find space to emerge. Collapse does not destroy you. It destroys the illusion of you, and if you are brave enough not to rebuild what once broke you, then that wreckage can become the first stone of a self no longer hiding, no longer afraid to lose, no longer running. Because in the end, when everything falls away, what remains is who you are. When everything you once leaned on has collapsed, when the old foundation offers no foothold, you will stand in ruins with a question rising from instinct. Why? Why did this happen to me? Why now? Why am I the one who tried so hard, the one who lost everything? That question is deeply human. It is the cry of the ego losing control, but the Stoic does not seek answers in chaos. They remain silent. Because they know the right question is not, why did this happen? But, in the midst of this collapse, who am I being forced to become? The truth is, you cannot choose what comes into your life, but you always choose the posture with which you face it. The weak will kneel and whimper before adversity, seeking blame, resenting, denying. The arrogant will puff up, pretending to be unshaken, masking pain with pride or busyness. But the awakened will pause not to surrender, but to listen for what life is urging them to see within themselves. What hurts you most often speaks the deepest truth about you. Not about who you've been, but about who you're meant to become. Maybe you need to learn to let go. Maybe you need to rise without expecting anyone to lift you. Maybe you need to say enough to a version of you that has outlived its use. And maybe, for the first time, you need to take responsibility for the wound you carry, not to blame yourself, but to stop asking others to heal it. The Stoics do not make excuses for circumstances. They don't see tragedy as injustice. They see every event, even the cruelest, as part of the training of character. Marcus Aurelius did not ask why he lost his child, why he was betrayed, or why he had to shoulder a decaying empire. Instead, he wrote, "The only question is, what does this demand of me as a human being?" And that's the key. Life doesn't need you to decode the meaning of pain. It needs you to answer with behavior, with attitude, with the growth that pain alone awakens. You cannot control the storm, but you can control the direction of your oar. And in the very moment you stop chasing reasons and begin choosing how to move forward with dignity, with clarity, with compassion, collapse stops being a tragedy. It becomes an upgrade no one asks for, but no one escapes. If you're standing among the remains of what once was your life, and everything is no longer what it used to be, stop trying to glue the pieces back together. Instead, ask yourself, what have I been freed from? And now, who am I free to become? Some losses have no name, but in silence, they return to you something you thought you already had the right to rewrite yourself. 2. Sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a sixth sense. Not everyone is taught how to face their emotions. Most of us grow up in families, in cultures where tears must be wiped quickly, fear must be hidden, and anger is seen as losing control. Emotions, rather than being listened to, become something we're ashamed of. We learn to hide sadness behind a smile, to mask pain with busyness, to silently swallow the heaviness and convince ourselves we're fine. But what we bury does not disappear. It lies in the dark, seeping into our decisions, our relationships, our unsaid words. And one day, it speaks in unexplained anxiety, in uncontrollable rage, in endless, sleepless nights because the heart beats out of rhythm. These are not signs of weakness. They are the soul's warning system quietly telling you that something inside needs to be seen. At its deepest core, sensitivity is not too much. It's the ability to sense the finest shifts in emotional space. When someone's words aren't genuine, you feel it not because you're paranoid, but because your inner compass is vibrating off-center. When you walk into a room and feel a heaviness in the air, it's not your imagination, you're touching the energy that's breaking apart in silence. You're not too emotional. You're honest about what others have forgotten how to feel. Epictetus once said that the first step in mastering life is to distinguish what is within our control and what is not. Emotions are no exception. You cannot stop yourself from feeling pain. But you can choose to listen to it rather than react like a victim. Because if emotions are the alarm, then silence toward them is like shutting off the fire alarm and letting the fire spread unconsciously. Emotions come and go, but what they signal can be a door to transformation. Feeling uneasy in a relationship doesn't mean you're difficult, it means your soul knows it's being drained. Feeling sad when a dream ends doesn't mean you've failed. It means that dream was once part of your identity, and you need time to say goodbye to that version of yourself. Deep emotions are signs you're still alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of waking up. Instead of treating emotions as enemies to be eliminated, treat them as messengers to be decoded. Each emotion is a sign, a map, an invitation to return inward. And if you're patient enough to listen, you'll realize no emotion comes to destroy you. They come to bring you back to yourself before you drift too far. Once you learn to listen to emotions as warnings, you begin to see something deeper. That sensitivity doesn't just protect you, it's the gateway to connecting with the world in a way no one else can. A tender heart, seemingly inconvenient in a cold world, is the only way to love without dissolving, to empathize without disappearing, to open your heart without losing yourself. We often think we need to harden ourselves to avoid pain. That if our heart is soft, we'll be used, stepped on, devoured in one-sided relationships. But that's the thinking of someone who's been hurt but never truly healed. It's not the soft heart that breaks, it's the unguarded self that doesn't know who they are in love. We give it all, not because we're too kind, but because we were never taught to protect the core of ourselves. A heart soft enough to feel but steady enough not to become someone else is a trustworthy heart. The Stoics don't teach us to freeze emotions, but to remain ourselves within them. Seneca wrote, "Love as if you could lose, but live as if you are complete." That doesn't mean coldness. It means learning to love with your whole heart without letting that love define your entire worth. When you love someone so much that you lose your inner voice, that's not love. It's self-abandonment disguised as devotion. A truly sensitive person never loves by possession. They don't force anyone to stay. They don't control. They don't turn love into a tool. They love because they see beauty in the other, but they are not blind. They feel the boundaries the heart must not cross if it is to remain kind to itself. And when the relationship ends, they hurt deeply but never lose their dignity to hold on, because they understand. True love never demands the sacrifice of selfhood for a place in someone else's life. Fragility doesn't make you weak. It makes you kind. It gives you eyes that see through the cracks, ears that hear the unsaid, and a heart that can hold someone's sorrow without suffocating your own. In a world full of iron egos, a tender heart is rare because it still knows how to feel, how to melt, how to forgive without losing itself in the process. A heart that knows pain does not need armor. It needs to be heard, respected, and protected by you as your most loyal companion. Because in the end, you may lose many things: money, status, opportunities. But if you keep this heart, you will never lose yourself. 3. When everything falls apart. It's a call back to your original self. Not every collapse is an ending. Some are simply the sound of a shell cracking, one that had grown too tight for your soul. But in the moment it happens, you don't see it that way. You only feel the emptiness rushing in like a storm that sweeps away every familiar anchor. The job is gone. The person you love walks away. The home you once called a sanctuary turns silent. And in the middle of this wreckage, you wonder, have I lost everything? But you've never lost everything. You've only lost the things labeled mine that were never truly you. A title you held on to please your parents. A love you stayed in just to avoid loneliness. Not because there was still connection, an image you meticulously curated so the world would believe you were okay, even though inside you had been cracking for a long time. These things didn't fall apart to punish you, but to peel away the disguises that are no longer needed for the road ahead. Seneca once wrote, We suffer not because of fate, but because we refuse to let go of what has decayed. When you lose something, the pain is real. But look closely. Most of that pain doesn't come from the loss itself. It comes from the inner tug-of-war between two truths, one part of you clinging to what's old and the other whispering for you to step beyond it. You're not destroyed by the loss. You're simply forced to face the fact that you've lived too long in a version of yourself that no longer fits. And that's what leaves you stunned. Not the loss, but the honesty. That's when you realize how many years you spent preserving temporary comfort instead of seeking a life that was truly yours. Every layer that falls away reveals a raw, unpolished skin, not painted with praise or admiration. It's coarse, sometimes unattractive, but it's alive. And from that place, you begin again. Not from zero, but from the truth. You no longer have to pretend. Because in the end, what is real will remain, and what is false will scatter when life begins to blow with force. No one said this would be easy, but the moment you feel like you're breaking is the same moment you are being stripped of what was never truly yours. Not to perfect you, but to make you so real that nothing can be stolen from you again. When you've reached the bottom of your collapse, when there's nothing left to hold on to, no one left to impress, it is also the first time you have the space to lay a new brick for yourself. Not because you want to start over, but because you have to, and this time, not on a foundation of borrowed expectations, but from the stance of someone who has nothing left to fake. Every collapse brings a silent gift, the choice. You're no longer obligated to walk the old path, no longer trapped in roots carved by others. You can finally ask, what kind of life do I truly want to live? Not for applause, not for acceptance, but because I crave it for myself. You begin to notice the difference between living a life that was pre-designed and a life that is deliberately chosen. Before, you might have followed the formula. Graduate on time, marry at the right age, build a stable career, smile for the camera. But now, with everything slipping through your fingers like sand, you start to see what remains and realize that's what truly matters. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Rebuild yourself every day." It sounds gentle, but it's a revolution of the soul. Rebuilding isn't about polishing your outer shell. It's about choosing again each small thing with the same hands that once trembled after losing everything. You relearn how to be alone without feeling empty, how to say no without explanation, how to do ordinary things but with the mindfulness of someone who once lost themselves living in someone else's dream. Now you might live slower, have less, but it's truer. No one can define success for you anymore. No one can impose love on you unless it carries mutual respect. No one can demand you to become their ideal if that version erases your inner voice. A life that isn't borrowed won't always be glamorous, but it will be lighter and stronger, because no one can take anything from you if you no longer depend on it to define yourself. And like a tree rising from barren soil, you will see that brokenness didn't kill you. It only destroyed the house you never truly chose to build. And from those ashes, you're given the chance to build a real refuge, a place where you can live, breathe, and love as yourself. No more pretending. No need to be understood. Just real enough that you no longer have to suffer through a life full of noise but void of soul. 4. A shattered dream is not the end. It's a map to freedom. Not every dazzling dream is a guiding light. Some are patched together from the expectations of others, shaped by fear of scarcity, and fed in environments where success is defined by fame, wealth, or status. They seem radiant, but you don't realize you're living in a house with no windows, where all light is artificial and there's no space to breathe. You once thought that dream was everything because it made others proud, made you feel on track. made life seem to have clear answers. You clung to it like a life raft in the chaos. But one day, when you finally reach the goal you've chased for so long, you suddenly feel lost in your own victory. Everything is fine, but you're not. The emptiness begins to leak from within, even as the outside world celebrates you as someone who has it all. That's when you realize it's not that you chose the wrong dream, but that you chose it before you truly listened to yourself. You chose it from an earlier version of you, a fragile self that never questioned what kind of life it truly wanted. And as you grow, as your experiences and soul deepen, that old dream loses its precision. It no longer fits who you've become. But because it was once beautiful, once a destination, you're afraid to let go, as if letting it go is betraying your past, betraying yourself. Epictetus didn't speak of dreams, but he spoke of choosing yourself with a core question. Who are you in this situation? A beautiful dream may fuel a decade of effort, but if those 10 years were spent becoming someone others admire, are you truly living or just signing a contract that borrows the name of freedom? The harsh truth is this. Sometimes the dream you believed was your light is what prolongs your blindness, because it delays your return inward. It makes you wear a role so long that you forget the sound of your true voice. And worst of all, it makes you ignore every signal from your soul because you're afraid that if you listen, you'll have to abandon the effort, the time, and the emotional investment you poured your youth into. But you cannot grow if you keep living within the frame of a dream that no longer aligns with who you are today. What once looked right loses its truth when it begins to suffocate you. And the moment you dare to face that is the moment you begin to truly live. Not to fulfill an outdated vision, but to explore a version of yourself that has never been lived. Not to succeed as the world defines it, but to live rightly as someone awakening, finding their way home after a long dream. When a dream collapses, people rush to call it failure, as if all your effort, sacrifice, and time suddenly prove your foolishness, weakness, or lack of ability. But that very definition is the real failure, because it stops people from seeing what's truly happening. Some dreams need to break so what's been held back inside you can finally emerge into the light. Standing before the ashes of what you once hoped would be your purpose, you face two choices. One, stay there, endlessly trying to patch the past. Two, look deeply into your own form and ask the question you never dared. Without that dream, who am I? This question is not comfortable. But precisely because it's uncomfortable, it's true. Because it no longer revolves around achievement, but begins to open up a new definition of living, not based on outcomes, but on awareness in every choice. A shattered dream only disorients you if you believe you cannot exist without it. But when you dare to release it, you'll see that very failure is the doorway to freedom. A space where you no longer live as a machine, chasing metrics, but as a human, learning to be present, to choose, and to take responsibility for the truths inside you. Every broken dream is a shedding of illusion, allowing the true self to finally breathe. Seneca once wrote, "There is no favorable wind for the one who doesn't know where they're going." But once you know, or at least dare to admit that the old destination no longer fits, then every new direction holds deeper meaning, not driven by success, but by alignment. You no longer force yourself to live by a social timeline, but begin to live as if each day is a test of courage to be real. Maybe you've lost a dream job, a person who meant the world, or a position you sacrificed everything to reach. But strangely, in that emptiness, you begin to hear a small sound, the true voice of yourself. And from that rubble, you don't rebuild the old version. You build a new one, not because it's grander, but because this time it's real. not borrowed, not forced, not for show. Every dream that collapses gives you a chance to be reborn without having to die. And if you are brave enough not to call it the end, you'll see. Behind the pain is a new map. Not printed with directions, but wide enough for you to draw a life that no longer needs anyone's permission to be lived authentically. 5. Pain doesn't weaken you. It gives you what comfort never could. Pain never knocks politely. It arrives uninvited, shatters the familiar order, and leaves behind nameless fragments. But the most terrifying part has never been the wound itself. It's the choice of who you will become afterward. No one emerges from pain in their old shape. You either become hard like stone or soft like water, one or the other. There is no middle. Some, after being hurt, grow cold, guarded, closed off. They say they're protecting themselves from being hurt again. But in truth, they've let the pain take over not to learn from it, but to run from it. And in that running, they lose themselves their capacity to connect, to love, to trust. They think numbness is strength. But strength is not the absence of feeling. It is the ability to feel and not drown. Others choose differently. They too have been hurt, have lost, have fallen to the bottom. But they choose to stay. They don't rush to brush the pain aside as something shameful. They face it, let it teach them what no advice ever could. That even if the world turns its back on them, they still have themselves. And that self, after walking through fire, is no longer fragile. It's not proud, not loud, just steady. When you are betrayed, you can learn to distrust everything, or you can learn how to trust the right ones. When you're abandoned, you can choose to shut your heart, or you can learn how to stay with yourself before seeking anyone else. When life throws you into chaos, you can tell yourself the world is cruel, or you can realize that even in cruelty, you still hold the power to choose your response. Every wound is an invitation. Will you use it to sow bitterness, or will you let it sharpen your awareness? No one can answer that for you. No one knows exactly what you've been through, but you know. You know how that pain made you want to give up, how it made you sit silent in the dark, uninterested in light. And if you're reading this, it means you didn't give up. That's a sign, not of immortality, but of a heart that hasn't died. A heart that still wants to understand, to learn, to awaken instead of merely react. Because in the end, everything you've gone through wasn't meant to make you harder. It was meant to make you soft enough to touch your true nature. And in that place, there is no bitterness. Only a deep silence and a quiet smile in realizing you're still alive and still capable of love. When you choose awareness over bitterness, the real journey begins, because awareness doesn't automatically make you strong. It just pulls you out of the victim's dream and reminds you, if pain has come, you cannot let it leave empty-handed. It must leave something behind that's worth more than memory. And the only thing worth keeping is character. No lesson molds character like the ones that bring you to your knees. No theory teaches integrity like the moment you're faced with choosing between revenge and forgiveness. No textbook teaches courage like those times you walk through chaos without a hand on your back. Character is not forged in the spotlight, but in the shadows, where no one's watching, where you choose honesty with no one checking, kindness with no one noticing, and steadiness when your whole being is shaking. People often ask how to become stronger, but they fear the very things that forge true strength: loss, betrayal, failure, loneliness. No one wants to walk through hell, but only those who do carry a strength that can't be faked. Pain, when welcomed the right way, is a furnace. It melts away vanity, borrowed expectations, and all the masks worn just to please others. It leaves you bare, original, unadorned, but undeniably you. There are things you cannot learn when life is smooth. You can't learn deep gratitude without first losing. You can't know true pride unless you've been humbled. And you can't understand the real meaning of character until you've stood at a crossroads of pain, where one step leads to bitterness and the other to growth. Epictetus was tortured until his leg broke, but he never saw it as a tragedy. He saw it as the beginning of a deeper freedom when you realize that even if everything is taken from you, there is one thing no one can steal: how you choose to live. And that's where character takes root, not in glory, but in the moment you hit bottom and still hold fast to what you believe is right. Pain doesn't turn you into a hero. It brings you to a threshold where you must choose. Become a watered-down version of yourself, or let every fracture be the mold that shapes someone unshakable. The metal that makes character isn't gold or silver. It's iron, tempered by fire, by hammer, by blows that once felt impossible to rise from. And if you're still standing after it all, you're not just stronger, you've been forged. 6. Starting over is a sacred act of self-respect. Some beginnings come with no flowers, no applause, no witnesses. Just one person you standing between what just collapsed and what hasn't yet begun, taking one quiet step out of the dark. It's not an act of optimism, nor the result of a plan. It's a sign of a quiet, uncelebrated quality: self-respect. Starting over doesn't mean you lost. It means you've outgrown the version of yourself that thought it was winning. Outsiders may see the shift and assume you're running from failure, but only you know you're turning toward what your conscience has been whispering: it's time. Some jobs, some relationships, some ways of living, no matter how familiar, become betrayals once you've outgrown them. Many stay, simply out of fear of what others will say. But the one who starts over is the one who chooses truth over convenience. In a world obsessed with achievement, starting over is seen as failure, a detour from success. But Stoics see it differently. They teach that nothing is more sacred than aligning your life with your inner order. Starting over isn't a desperate act, it's a decision full of dignity. Because it demands that you say no, not to others, but to the ego that once clung to what no longer fits. And that no, even if silent, rings out like a bell of inner cleansing, reminding you that you deserve a life that's real, not borrowed or compromised. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If it is right, do not concern yourself with whether it is easy." Starting over is that quote made flesh. It's not easy, but it is right. Right for the voice you've silenced for years. Right for the sleepless nights you blamed on stress. Right for the tightness in your throat every time you pretended to be okay. Right for the growing weight of silence as you sat among dreams that no longer stirred your soul. You don't need to wait for the perfect time to start over. It begins with one lonely decision that you refuse to live the rest of your life in a role written by someone else's expectations. It's not starting from scratch. It's resuming the life that's truly yours after a long detour away from your essence. And because of that, it carries a sacred beauty, not in a religious sense, but a noble one. For there is nothing nobler than rising not for pride, not for competition, but out of deep respect for the best in you. You don't need anyone to cheer for this journey. Starting over is a quiet oath. I will no longer betray myself. Even if that means leaving a city, a relationship, a job, or a lifestyle that once made you feel safe, but no longer makes you feel alive. Starting over is a rejection of mere survival in favor of life. And if someone asks, Why start over when you already have everything? Just smile. Because maybe you had everything except yourself. I've had to start over, not once, but many times. Each time felt like I was tearing down what I'd just built with my own hands. Sometimes it was a job everyone dreamed of. Other times, it was a relationship that had carried my entire youth. And the hardest of all was letting go of an image of me once admired by so many. No one applauds when you turn around. But I knew deep down if I didn't, I'd only walk another mile further away from myself. There were nights I lay in a completely silent room, listening to my own breath, and felt like someone else was living my life for me. Not because I was weak, but because I had stayed silent too long with the things that hollowed me out. Self-respect doesn't shout, but it pulses like a drum beat in the chest, reminding me, if I don't dare to start over, I'll lose the only thing still worth preserving, the self untouched by fear and expectation. I've lost many things and found myself again in those very losses. Like someone taking off a soaked shirt in the cold rain, shivering but lighter. Because even stripped bare, at least it's still real. And maybe the most sacred thing in life is not starting early, but daring to start again when everyone thinks you should have stopped. If you found value in this journey, hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Not for this video, but for yourself, the one choosing awareness over judgment, growth over victimhood. And remember this, a soul that has been broken, if it still dares to love, to live, and to begin again, is not marked by a crack, but lit by a window where the light gets in. See you in the next video.